Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Odyssey Recaps Below the Surface Edition. Today we are recapping Book 14, titled by Emily Wilson as A Loyal Slave. The chapter opens with Odysseus, having been magically disguised by Athena as a beggar, heading toward the swineherd's house as she directed. The chapter opens by telling us that this swineherd is a loyal slave of Odysseus's, and the poem says, "Of all those in Odysseus's household, this noble slave cared the most about preserving the master's property." His name is Eumaeus, and he has been grieving deeply for his lost master, and is disgusted with the behavior of the suitors and the damage they are wreaking on Odysseus's household. He is in charge of a giant herd of pigs and boars, and he has his own house and slaves of his own, but it's important to keep in mind that he is still a slave himself, bound to serve Odysseus and his family. Odysseus approaches his house and is almost set upon by Eumaeus's guard dogs, but Eumaeus calls them away, then greets the ragged stranger respectfully, telling him that if the dogs had harmed the stranger, it would have been more than he could bear, as he is already grieving deeply for his absent master, and is stuck raising his pigs for other men to eat. Eumaeus invites the wandering stranger in for some food and drinks and to share his troubles. He ushers the disguised Odysseus in and sits him down at the table, saying that it is important to honor guests and foreigners, even the very poor, as Zeus watches over beggars, guests, and strangers alike. He tells Odysseus that he doesn't have much, but he will gladly share what he has with him. Then he says, "Life is like this for slaves. We live in fear when younger men have power over us." He is saddened and tells Odysseus that his real master is being kept from home by the gods, and if he had been here, Eumaeus would have been taken care of. He would have been given land and a wife in recompense for his years of loyal service. Sadly, he is certain his master is dead, and curses Helen and her family for taking his master from him, along with so many others who died at Troy. Eumaeus retrieves 2 suckling pigs to roast for the stranger, and tells him about the suitors who were eating Telemachus out of house and home in his master's absence. He says, "Their hearts have no compassion. They ignore the gods, who watch and hate such crimes and bless good deeds and justice. Even cutthroat pirates who go to plunder other people's lands, seizing the spoils that Zeus has granted them, and sail home in a ship filled full of treasure. Even they feel the watchful eyes of gods." Of course, we've just seen with the Phaeacians how the gods do not always bless the good deeds, and how one might note that Odysseus himself could fit the description of a cutthroat who plunders other people's lands and seizes their spoils. The difference seems to lie in a question of honor. A war has theoretically been sanctioned by the gods, and one may conduct warfare honorably, while what the suitors are doing is more akin to outright theft and piracy, and the assault on Odysseus' home is not only not a noble war, but a betrayal of Xenia, the guest-friend relationship, something closely linked to Zeus, who watches over strangers. Eumaeus carries on in his complaint, saying that the suitors sit wasting Odysseus's, wealth on feasts, slaughtering dozens of his best animals each night, and pouring out wine for reckless drinking. Odysseus eats and listens to his loyal slave, thinking of ways he can destroy the suitors. Once he has eaten and drunk his fill, he asks Eumaeus, who is this noble man he works for? What's his name? He says that if the man's master fought at Troy, perhaps he knows this great man. Eumaeus tells him in a roundabout way that his master is the famous Odysseus, but also tells the stranger not to bother telling stories about Odysseus or giving predictions about his fate or possible return, as he, Penelope, and Telemachus have all learned long ago not to trust anyone with tales of Odysseus' movements and actions after the war, as they all turn out to be lies told for profit, and each time their hearts are broken again. So now they no longer listen to any such stories, and for his part, Eumaeus is certain that Odysseus is dead. He says his death is a ruin for us all, but especially for him as a slave, because he will never have a master so kind as Odysseus, not even if he went back to his own parents in his native land. In fact, he grieves more for Odysseus than his own family, and sees him as a brother, because Odysseus loved and cared for him with such kindness. The disguised Odysseus insists that King Odysseus will return, and swears that he is on his way home at that very moment, and he won't ask for any recompense for his prophecy until Odysseus is safely home. He says he despises men who lie for profit, and predicts that Odysseus will come home within this very cycle of the moon. And when he does, he says that Odysseus will pay back all those here who disrespect his wife and noble son. Eumaeus is not convinced, but says he wishes it was true, especially for Telemachus, who has grown so handsome and strong, but who has been influenced by some god ruining his good sense into embarking on a journey to find word of his father. A dangerous trip at the best of times, but made even more deadly by the suitors who lie in wait for him to return so that they may ambush him and murder him, wiping out Odysseus' line entirely. Then Eumaeus changes the topic and asks the disguised Odysseus who he is, where he has come from, and how he came to be on Ithaca. Odysseus now spins the second part of his Cretan lie, and before I dive into it, I want to remind you that it is very complex and in many places inconsistent. Please keep in mind that Odysseus is in disguise, pretending to be a different person entirely, but he also talks about the hero Odysseus as someone separate from himself. This is difficult to follow, so I'm going to give you a very quick summary here before diving into the story in more detail. Essentially, the disguised Odysseus says that he is from Crete. He is a man of quasi-noble birth who had achieved great wealth through warfare, but has been tricked and robbed various times throughout his life before being sold into slavery and surviving various trials, including shipwrecks. And along the way, he had heard about Odysseus and had received reliable information that Odysseus was on his way home. That's the gist of it. Now, here's the detail. And to try to make it a little bit more clear, I will temporarily call the disguised version of Odysseus by his Latin name, Ulysses, and use Odysseus when he is talking about the man, the myth, the legend himself, Odysseus, as a separate figure that he has had news of. Confusing, I know, but I hope it helps. So Ulysses, Odysseus' disguised persona, tells Eumaeus that he is the son of a slave woman and a rich Cretan man, and despite his mother's status as a slave, he was raised with the same respect by his father as his legitimate sons. But when he died, his half-brothers seized the father's property for themselves, giving Ulysses only a tiny patch of land to live on. But thankfully, Ulysses was very talented and managed to win a wife with an excellent dowry. He says he never liked farm work, housekeeping, or raising children, but the gods made him love and excel at sailing and warfare. Through warfare, he became rich and became an important man in Crete. But then, far-seeing Zeus arranged that expedition of disaster, which made so many men collapse and fall, the Trojan War. The people of Crete insisted that he sail to Troy with the king of Crete, and so he went and fought and was cursed along with all the Greeks by the gods. He made it back to Crete, but was only there for a single month before he had an impulse to sail to Egypt. He took 9 ships and set off, but once they arrived in Egypt, he left the crew to scout the area, and when he returned, his crew had been damaging the fields and murdering the men and enslaving the women and children of the town that they landed in. The people in the city heard their screams, and the warriors arrived to fight them, aided in part by Zeus. Many of his men were killed, and the rest were taken as slaves. Zeus then put a plan in Ulysses' mind, and he dropped his sword and shield and approached the Egyptian king's chariot unarmed and supplicated himself to him. The king was merciful and spared him, taking him home along with him, protecting him from the wrath of the Egyptian people, more afraid of the wrath of Zeus if he failed to protect a stranger who had asked for aid. Ulysses then stayed in Egypt for 7 years and again gains great wealth. But then in the 8th year, an avaricious Phoenician man arrives who is good at lying and exploiting people, and he tricked Ulysses into returning to Phoenicia with him, where he stayed for a year before being taken with his men to Libya, where he was told he could trade, but the man was really planning to sell Ulysses as a slave. He was suspicious, but went anyway, and somewhere along the journey, Zeus caused a storm to blow up and hurled a lightning bolt at them, destroying the ship and killing everyone besides Ulysses, who clung to the mast in desperation. He drifted for 10 days before being swept to Thesprotia, where he was found washed up on a beach, half dead by a prince, who took him to his father's house and dressed him in fine clothes. It was here that he heard about Odysseus, the king telling him that Odysseus had stopped there on his journey home before leaving to go to Dodona to ask a holy oak tree what Zeus wanted him to do and how best to get home. He said Odysseus was deciding how to get back to Ithaca, weighing if it was best to return in disguise or openly. The king had given Odysseus a boat and crew and sent him on his way to Ithaca, and he promised to do the same for Ulysses, giving him a boat to travel to Dulichium and telling the crew to take care of him. But sadly, the crew betrayed him and tried to enslave him, taking off his rich clothes and dressing him in the rags he is currently wearing. They had stopped at Ithaca to eat and rest, and had left him tied up on the ship. But while they were off getting food, the gods had loosened Ulysses' bonds and allowed him to escape. then helped him evade his captors and eventually brought him here to Eumaeus for aid. So that's the story. I'm now going to go back to referring to disguised Odysseus by his proper Greek name. As you can see, it's a strangely complex tale that seems to incorporate hints of truth. And as we discussed in the previous episode, a scholar named Steve Reese has proposed that it could be a remnant of pre-Homeric versions of the story where Odysseus himself really does go to Crete. And again, if you'd like to hear more about this theory, just let me know in the comments. But the takeaway is, don't worry if you feel lost with some of these details. It is very confusing, and scholars have been debating it for literally thousands of years, which really goes to show just how ancient this poem really is, because there were scholars thousands of years ago discussing it just like we are now, and it was already old then. And that's just the written version. We have no idea how far back the oral tradition goes and just how old this story really is. It's just fantastic. This is why I love history, guys. But for now, back to the story. Eumaeus tells Odysseus that he is moved by his sad story, but that he still doesn't believe his master Odysseus is on his way home, and lightly admonishes the stranger for telling silly lies. He says, "I know about my master's homecoming. The gods detest him. They loathe him, since they did not let him die at Troy or in his friends' arms when the war was winding up, so that the Greeks could build a mound to glorify him and his son in times to come. The robber winds have snatched him. He has no glory now." Eumaeus says that in his beloved master's absence, he has become a loner, staying with the pigs and only going into town when wise Penelope calls him to share news of Odysseus. He says that when she does this, the people all cluster around Penelope, clamoring for news about their lost master. But he doesn't say anything, because he lost hope long ago, after he was fooled by an Anatolian who said that he had seen Odysseus in Crete with the king, and that he would be home by harvest time, rich and with his fleet intact. When that proved untrue, Eumaeus lost all hope. And though he will be kind to this new stranger who has arrived out of both pity and fear of Zeus, he refuses to listen to any more predictions about his lost master. The disguised Odysseus says that he sees that he can't convince him, but promises that if he is wrong, Eumaeus' own slaves may drive him over a cliff atop to his death, as a warning to all others who try to trick him. Eumaeus says he thinks Zeus wouldn't look kindly on him doing such a thing, and then changes the subject, saying that it's time for dinner. Eumaeus heads off and cooks a fattened pig, performing the correct offerings and sacrifices to the gods before feeding his men and the disguised Odysseus, even giving the stranger the spinal cut of meat, the piece of honor. After they eat, Odysseus decides to test Eumaeus' kindness yet again, and tells him another convoluted story about his time at Troy fighting alongside the Greek heroes. He said that one night they were waiting for an ambush and were sleeping in a freezing marsh, like hidden inside the marsh, when he realized that he had forgotten his cloak. So he asked the famed Odysseus to help him, and Odysseus did, by tricking another man into leaving his own cloak while he ran back to pass a message to Agamemnon, who was waiting at the ships, leaving his cloak for the beggar. He tells Eumaeus that he wishes that he were young and strong again, so that one of them would give him their cloak, because he's cold now. Eumaeus tells him that he will happily give him his best cloak for the night, but that he must make sure to give it back in the morning as he only has one, and that when Telemachus arrives, he will give him clothing and aid when he returns from his journey. With that, Eumaeus gives the disguised Odysseus both his best cloak and his bed, while he goes outside to sleep with the pigs. Odysseus is glad to see his slave still caring so much about his master's possessions, and everyone goes to sleep for the night. And that is where our chapter ends. Join me next time for book 15, which is intriguingly titled The Prince Returns. I will see you there.